there's no more interesting time in the past century to be working in the technology space.
What is the risk of using ChatGPT for your business needs?
Here's a nightmare story I heard from another founder. They were using ChatGPT. A competitor had just signed a contract with Subway, and they said, tell me what that contract would look like with Subway. What they got in response was the exact contract that their competitor had signed with Subway. They were able to verify it's the right people signing the document, right pricing, everything.
Really? What is the risk that people don't understand?
That is the kind of nightmare story we want to help people avoid. There was a court order that said anybody below 0 data retention, you have to retain all temporary chats.
I want to have my private LLM. How much does it cost?
Here's the open secret. I'll say this on camera. If you're a startup, you can apply for credits. They're very generous with their credits, and you can basically get started for free. That's a pre-seed round of funding. It's insane.
How difficult is to make a large language model?
Extremely difficult.
What would you advise to your 20 years self if you have to start all over today?
So the key part of that, I think there's one personality trait more important than anything else today, which is curiosity.
Thanks, Ivan, for taking out time for this podcast. I really, really appreciate it.
Thanks for having me. Glad to be here.
Okay, awesome. So, Ivan, my objective with this podcast is to first learn about your entrepreneurship journey. When I came across your profile, I saw that you started companies and one of them got acquired by Yahoo. Then you worked in multiple engineering roles. Then Datasaur came into the picture. So that's like a dream entrepreneurship journey for a lot of people, right? I know where you're today, you might be thinking, okay, there's a lot that can be achieved for sure. But I know a lot of people, including myself, that we always want to be, okay, can I reach there? Or what can I learn from Ivan? So that's one objective. Second objective is I am very, very passionate about large language models and how the space is growing into agentic AI world. What you are doing at Datasaur really, really intrigued me. And trust me, there are a lot of founders, friends of mine, people who are working in jobs. They all ask this question. We all discuss it so many times on how to build a private LLM. So we'll be talking about this. I would really appreciate if you can share thoughts about this.
Absolutely. So I think, first of all, LLM technologies, there's no more interesting time in the past century to be working in the technology space, right? This technology is fundamentally transforming how we're operating as individuals. OpenAI just released some mind-boggling stats. They still grew 40% in usage over the last 5 months, right? This is something that's already been very pervasive. A lot of people are using this technology, and yet they're still growing at that kind of speed. And so LLMs themselves are very interesting. And then now on top of that, we're focusing on this area of private LLMs. For us, that's particularly meaningful because a lot of people are using ChatGPT at home and now wondering how they can use it at work. But there's a lot of restrictions on why you wouldn't be able to use this at work. It could be your company's IT team. It could be government regulatory standards saying, hey, this is very sensitive data. You cannot, should not be sending this data to a third party like OpenAI or Anthropic. So we are focusing on this market of private LLMs where you can use the same technology at work, but it's all secure, compliant, and stored within your servers.
Okay, that's great. So like when an individual who's just starting a company doesn't have a lot of funds to invest in, they definitely want to keep their data secure. How costly is it? And how can someone get started? Like what infrastructure is needed? What amount of tech that they need to know?
Yeah, so that's the interesting part. It's really not that expensive.
Okay.
Fortunately, we're building on the foundations of technologies that have come before us. Big data, cloud platforms, these already exist and are perfect foundations for LLMs as they stand today. So for example, somebody who would want to get started today can absolutely start with an open source model hosted on, for example, AWS Bedrock or on Google Cloud Platform or Microsoft Azure, right? You can get started that same day and have a private LLM to, we'll talk later about the nuances and the differences between definitions of private, but you can have a private LLM on your very first day.
Okay. And when you talk about like open source models, right? Which open source models are good to get started that you would recommend? Okay, like go ahead with like this, and this.
So We're speaking at a particularly interesting time because just this week, just 2 days ago,
Okay.
OpenAI is finally living up to the open part of their name and
Okay.
released their first open source model since 2019, since GPT-2.
Okay.
Right? This is, people didn't pay attention to LLMs until 3.5, that's ChatGPT in 2022. This is their first open model since then.
Okay.
This is huge for the business. Very exciting news for everyone. So that could be the model to beat. To be honest, we are still doing more thorough investigation, but our preliminary investigation, that is the most powerful model.
Okay.
But it's not your only option. So for example, Meta, up until now, has been leading the charge as far as US companies building in the open. And their Llama 3.3 model, and there's a Llama 4 model as well, these are very powerful models. And recently, we've seen a wave of models from Chinese companies that have actually been topping the leaderboards up until this week. So Quen, Kimi, DeepSeek, which of course caused a stock market crash in January. There's a lot of different models, and they all have their relative strengths and weaknesses.
Okay. Let's talk even at more ground level. And sorry if I'm asking too silly questions,
No,
right?
please.
But we are trying to make this podcast for people who come from like non-tech background. When we say open source models,
Yeah.
and when we say that you can host it on Amazon Bedrock or Azure or AWS, two questions. First is, what does an open source model means?
Right.
Second question is, we all see that OpenAI come with like a new version every other month, right? And for someone like me, it becomes difficult to track, okay, which version is better out of like those 10 versions, right?
Yeah.
What happens when the new version come and somebody who has hosted the previous on their private AWS or Azure, how do they upgrade to it?
Okay, definitely two big questions there.
Okay.
So let's start with the first one. What does open mean, right? Let's start with the opposite of that. What is not open? Non-open models are some that people are very familiar with. So for example, the three top proprietary models are OpenAI's GPT 4.1, along with their O3 mini series, Anthropic's Claude, Google Gemini. These are all, and Grok with a K, these are all proprietary models. What that means is I don't have access to those models. If I want to access them, I can only call them via an API that those companies host.
Absolutely.
Right? So I have to go and send a question to OpenAI, they'll give me the answer, but I don't have access to that model.
Okay.
Now, open models, there's more nuance than we need to get into in this podcast between open source versus open weights. But at a base level, what that means is I can actually take that model, deploy it to my own servers, or some of these models are small enough, I can deploy them to my own MacBook Pro at home, right? So these are models now I fully own and control. The data doesn't need to leave my machine. It doesn't have to leave my servers, right? And that can be critical. We work with healthcare companies, financial companies, where they're not allowed to send it anywhere outside of their servers. And so open is a way to allow those organizations to take advantage of this technology as well.
Got it. And how do they upgrade their existing LLM when the new version comes in? They just simply download and upgrade one?
So let's talk about upgrading. I'll bring this back to an analogy that might be more familiar to a lot of folks. It's kind of like choosing to buy a TV. Every year, there is some new OLED, QLED, ZLED, whatever, right? And people also similarly get kind of mixed up between what these different technologies and LED technologies do. So at some point, if you need a TV, you want to just get something either from last couple of years or this year, and it's going to be good enough. And most people, unless you're really, really into it, don't need to upgrade for a good 5 to 10 years.
Yep.
Right? So kind of similar with models today.
Okay.
Like these models are very powerful. And if we stopped all new research today, we would still be able to reap the benefits of all the R&D up until this moment for the next decade.
Really?
Yeah. We could stop. GPT-5 just released today. If there was no GPT-6, no 5.1, we would still be implementing this technology for the next decade. I guarantee it, right? It's already powerful. The thing about humans is we always get very accustomed to the latest. So as soon as it does all these things that we couldn't do before, we're like, great, what about this new thing? What about the next thing, right? So our standards are always kind of, okay, now we want it to be able to do more. Now we want these agentic systems that are capable. But it's already powerful enough. So a lot of people are always asking me like, well, should I just wait another 6 months? I'm sure the next version's coming later. There will be another version, but you can absolutely automate. If right now your process is 100% manual, and today's technology can automate 70% of that. We don't have to be too aggressive. Only 70%. Isn't 70% better than zero?
That's a great growth.
Right? And then the next generation might get you to 75%, 80%. But those are incremental. Getting to the first 70% is the critical first step.
2 questions. So when OpenAI comes up, or maybe Anthropic comes up with a new model, like every 2 or 3 weeks, we don't have to get anxious about, trying it and learning it and probably leaving what we are using.
Yeah.
Right?
That's just kind of like FOMO in marketing speaking, right? Especially here in Silicon Valley, you constantly see billboards like, do I have to be using the latest? But often the gap between even a model a year old versus the latest is a couple percent.
Okay.
Right? Now, don't we want to prioritize that 70% first? And then we can start optimizing. Once you can prove to your executives, to your board members that the 70% is working, then you'll have the budget to start upgrading. And by the way, upgrading isn't super difficult, right?
Okay.
But doesn't mean you have to like freeze and not make any investment in this technology just because you're waiting for the next generation. It's not slowing down.
Okay. No, that's amazing. Now, let's talk about cost related to it, right? And I'm thinking from a perspective of an early stage founder. I'm a founder with 4 of my team members, maybe all founders or like early team members. And I want to have my private LLM and I'm using Amazon AWS, suppose. How much does it cost for, like, how much would be my AWS bill every month?
Yeah.
How powerful, you said you can also have it on your MacBook. How powerful machine do I need to have? What is the minimum investment required to get started? And another question, I don't think I need to pay that $20 a month to ChatGPT again, right? If I host it privately.
Correct. That's a nice thing, right? So you don't have to pay per inference cost. You don't have to pay a subscription fee if you're using it on your own personal MacBook Pro. So there's a wide range of answers for that, right? It can be as simple as, okay, couple grand for the latest generation M4 MacBook Pro. You can get started on your own computer. Here's the open secret. I'll say this on camera. If you are working with AWS, with Google, with Microsoft, you can go and apply. If you're a startup, you can apply for credits. They're very generous with their credits. And you can basically get started for free. Now, the cost per month, all of this is, in the hopes that you grow as a company, you kind of become reliant on their systems, and you will pay them in the future. But even then, the costs vary widely because it depends on volume, it depends on the model that you need to use. So some people might want the state of the art, and some people might want smaller, more efficient models. Here's a real world example, right? If you're a healthcare company and you're using LLMs for decisions with real world consequences, then you want the best state of the art model. You will pay whatever it takes, you'll wait however long it takes to get the best answer. But on the other hand, if you are a customer support company, then it's actually the most powerful model might not be right for you. You care a lot about latency. You care about whether the model responds in 2 seconds versus 30 seconds. Because if it takes 30 seconds, you've already lost a customer.
Okay.
Right? So it's not always biggest, latest state-of-the-art model is best. There are many companies we're seeing who are now able to use kind of smaller, more efficient models, and they may not be as powerful, but they are cheaper and more time efficient.
Regarding cost, if I'm using, say, OpenAI's ChatGPT model, and suppose I'm paying a bill of, say, $1,000 a month. Like, I know some of the friends in my network, they pay $1,000 a month to use OpenAI's API. Will it be cheaper, definitely be more secure if they have their own private LLM? Will it be more cheaper for them to have an open source LLM and host it either on AWS or any other cloud or using Datasaur?
Yeah, so there is absolutely a crossing point, right? If your bill gets high enough, at some point you might want to consider bringing it in-house. So, for example, we work with clients that are spending 6 figures, even 7 figures per month. Yeah.
Okay.
Yes. Right? So you can imagine that's a lot of volume, that's a lot of inference. They're getting like the highest priority tier support from OpenAI. This news that they have their own open source model is actually very big news. They're actually cannibalizing potentially some of their own customers. Because what that means is maybe instead of paying $100,000 a month to OpenAI, I go install that open source on my own servers. Maybe it's a one-time setup fee. NVIDIA GPUs aren't cheap, obviously, but maybe I spend $250,000, get some powerful GPUs of my own, set it up, but that's a one-time cost. It's the equivalent of, should I rent versus buy a house?
Wow.
It's a more expensive upfront payment, but over time, and the threshold is different for each individual, there's a point where it just makes sense to stop renting and start buying.
Okay. What do you think, what's the reason behind that OpenAI has come up with their own open source model? Do they don't like having a lot of subscription coming in?
That's the talk of the town. So there's a lot of different hypotheses on this, and I'm guessing there's no one correct answer, but there are a couple of factors at play, right? First of all, leading up until this month of August, Chinese open source models have been gaining a lot of ground, right? They've already surpassed Meta's Llama on most of the leaderboards. And so there's a lot of pressure from the open models to, these open models were already going to exist, whether OpenAI was the one to open it up or not.
Okay.
Yeah. So they may feel like they need to have their own version out there that they can still control, right? The other thing is, there's a question sometimes around whether OpenAI is a consumer company or a B2B enterprise company. Up until recently, it was very clear that they were focused on consumer. Obviously, they have the most mindshare amongst all users around the globe. They are almost synonymous with LLMs across most parts of the planet, right? But with this move, it also solidifies that they are interested in the enterprise because this open source model would not really be of great interest, or certainly it's not a business tactic for anything outside of the enterprise. So with this, now they have their own entry. There was a related announcement a month or two ago where they have started consulting, and that starts at $10 million. So if you're a large multinational conglomerate, if you're Starbucks or Coca-Cola, maybe you'll want to work with OpenAI, deploy one of these open source models, and work with them to fine-tune and customize and host it on their own servers. And OpenAI still makes money from that.
Wow. No, that makes a lot of sense. By the way, when you mentioned that Amazon, Azure, and Google, they are very generous with the startup credit, just want to share, might be helpful for others. When I started my very first company, High Counselor, back in 2020, after leaving my job, we wanted to use AWS, definitely, to host one of our softwares. And we didn't have a lot of money to pay every month, $500 as a bill. So we got Amazon, AWS, startup $25,000 credit.
Yeah.
And when we ran out of those credits in 1.5 years, we applied to Microsoft Startup Program, and we got $150,000 of Azure credit. And it was super easy to get. It was like 5 minutes of application.
Yeah.
You fill one more application and you're done.
Yeah.
Right? And third, because now we're running out of our Microsoft credits, we are applying to Google Cloud Startup Program, and they offer, I think, 200 or 250K of
That's right.
credit. And that's a huge cost saving. Huge cost saving.
Yeah. Add that all up and you've got 400 to 500,000, right? That's a pre-seed round of funding for most startups.
Yes.
It's insane. They're incredibly generous with this, and almost every founder I know has done the same thing. They apply to all three programs, use up all their credits before moving on.
Yep.
So yes, it is cheaper than ever to start in Gen AI.
That's amazing. So let's move on. So you have implemented private LLMs for many companies.
Yeah.
What are the most common misconceptions that you have seen among companies implementing private LLMs? For example, to use ChatGPT. So I also teach people, how you can automate a lot of your work. Like, for example, I hate reading emails. So we built an AI agent that can read my emails on my behalf, and I get up in the morning, hey, what are the last 10 emails that I've received? Which ones are important? So I built an AI agent to automate my manual work, right? Something that frustrates me. And I teach to a lot of people, they love it, but they're like, Aditya, that's not allowed in our company to use ChatGPT.
Yes.
Right?
Yeah.
So how are these companies overcoming utilization of ChatGPT?
Yeah.
And what are their most common misconceptions? How do they adopt it?
So First of all, that story that you mentioned where they push back and say, well, my company doesn't let me use ChatGPT is a common one, right?
Yep.
And when I tell people we do private LLMs so you can use ChatGPT at work, I get all kinds of funny stories. We have everyone from saying like, hey, we're allowed to use Microsoft Copilot, but not ChatGPT. Or I can use ChatGPT, this is the funniest one, we can only use it one paragraph at a time. I'm like, why is that helping with any compliance or security protocols? But that's like people are still figuring out their policies and we hear kind of silly stories like that. So private LLM is a complete solution to that problem. You can now work with your IT team and say, look, if we host one of these open source models within our servers, it'll actually allow us to comply with all the regulations that you're worried about.
How do you convince enterprises? Do you need to convince enterprises that, hey, you can utilize LLMs privately?
So it's interesting. What we've discovered is we just put out there that we're doing private LLMs and people are coming to us, right? The story is very similar each and every time. It's either an employee or an executive who's using ChatGPT at home and a light bulb comes up like, why can't I use this at work? It would be really helpful if I could use this at work. But then their policy says no ChatGPT at work. So then they do a quick search for private LLMs, they discover us, we start a conversation, and we say, here's how we can solve your problem.
Got it. In general, when someone uses ChatGPT, right, we all use ChatGPT for our daily work, for every small thing. What is the risk of using ChatGPT for your business needs, right? Say somebody working at, I'm just taking like JP Morgan Chase or any finance company, right?
Yeah.
Even to write an email or to understand like a document worth 2 pages, if an employee upload that document on ChatGPT website and say, hey, can you give me a summary of it? Or they upload it on Notebook LM.
Yeah.
What is the risk that people don't understand?
So here's the nightmare story I heard from another founder, right? They were using ChatGPT and they said, tell me, because their competitor had just signed a contract with Subway, the sandwich company. And they said, tell me what that contract would look like with Subway. What they got in response was the exact contract that their competitor had signed with Subway. They were able to verify it's the right people signing the document, right pricing, everything, right? And they were shocked. They couldn't reproduce this, by the way, but they actually got and downloaded that contract. And the problem is we don't know how it got into the model to begin with. It could have been the competitor trying to upload and verify. It could have been somebody on the Subway side. It could have been HubSpot or Salesforce or any one of these places that stores that contract, just upload as a training document, right? And so that is the kind of nightmare story we want to help people avoid. The second thing I want to share is this is not through any fault of OpenAI of their own. There was a court order that said anybody below 0 data retention enterprise tier, basically the highest tier of OpenAI, you have to retain all temporary chats.
Okay.
So there's a mode in ChatGPT that's temporary chat. It's kind of like incognito for your browser. And a lot of people assume if they work in that mode, it should be safe. But what they don't know is that this court is ordering OpenAI to retain all of that. Suddenly, those things that you're putting into these temporary chats could show up in court records, right?
Wow.
These are the risks that you carry by sending your data to a third party.
So are you saying that whenever I upload a document on ChatGPT or OpenAI utilizes that document to train their model continuously, and they also store that model, so if required in the future, they can be presented as an evidence or like documents?
I'm not a lawyer.
Yeah,
this isn't what the terms and service say, but yes, I think for all the free tiers, they do retain the right to use any of your conversations as training for future conversations.
Okay, so you should not use ChatGPT specifically for very, very confidential data that you have.
Just to be clear, this is also not meant to be OpenAI slander. It came from Sam Altman himself on a podcast 2 weeks ago. He went on a podcast and said, people are using ChatGPT for things that are way too personal. Your conversations between doctors and patients are confidential. You have doctor-patient confidentiality. There's no such thing for LLMs yet. And he was telling people, you should not be putting your most personal, deepest, darkest secrets on ChatGPT because it doesn't have that confidentiality.
Yeah, another example he gave was like client-lawyer interaction.
Yeah, that's right.
Yeah, no, that makes a lot of sense. Cool. Another area, Ivan, that's growing so fast related to LLM that I'm personally very excited. A lot of companies, or a lot of, I would say, entrepreneurs, they're utilizing large language models like OpenAI, right? And they pick one of the industry problems. Say, for example, they take any problem related to finance industry, healthcare that they may have like encountered sometime. And then they upgrade this model, or maybe they fine tune this model specifically with some data related to this particular problem. They wrap it around in a nice website, launch it, right? And that website starts generating a lot of traction and hence a lot of revenue, right? And that's where I've seen a lot of founders coming up with the slogan of 1% $1 million revenue company. But at a high level, when I see them, it looks like just another wrapper of large language models. Is my understanding incorrect that most of these companies are actually using ChatGPT in the background, or how they are upgrading the large language model like ChatGPT so that it's become very useful for one particular use case?
Yeah. So this is a very controversial topic here in Silicon Valley, right? For a while, VCs were the ones kind of like mocking these startups as ChatGPT wrappers. They're going to be consumed by like the next model of the next generation of OpenAI's models will just do what your mini startup does, right? But then it turns out there are companies that continue to survive, even if they are ChatGPT wrapped services. So there's no verdict yet on who's correct here. I think there are certain companies where the business model makes sense. It is defensible. They're building a moat. There may be other business reasons where they are getting this data from customers and training their model and fine-tuning it to a specific niche that ChatGPT has no interest in covering, right? And then there are others that, just straight up die out because their technology is no longer relevant. There was never a moat to begin with. So it's too big a topic to say like definitively one way or another. But I will say this, there have been plenty of companies in the past. We in Silicon Valley call them lifestyle businesses. It can be 1, 2, 5-person shops that just make millions of dollars, never take a drop in VC funding, and just pay themselves millions of dollars every year, right? So that has always been a possibility. This is just the LLM version of that. And yes, it makes a good hype story. That's why we see it in media. There was that one kid who sold his company, I think, for like $65 million, right? Having built one of these companies. That's great. I'm very happy for him. But it makes for a nice media story. It doesn't mean that like everyone can do that or if that's going to be the norm moving forward.
Do you think that LLMs can do a better job, say for one particular situation or one particular problem, if they're trained with additional sets of data? Because it seems like LLM know everything.
Yes. So that's good. You had asked about misconceptions earlier. This is one of the misconceptions. Right? LLMs know everything that is on the public internet. Which, to be clear, is a lot, right? Between sites like Wikipedia and Reddit and whatnot, it's learned a lot about human civilization. But there's a lot it doesn't know. Which is everything, which is the private data layer. And that private data layer is, for example, you previously worked at Deloitte. It doesn't have the consultation manual at Deloitte on how to be a good consultant, presumably. It doesn't have all the legal contracts that have been signed. Again, Starbucks is my go-to company. It doesn't have access to all the legal contracts with all the vendors that Starbucks has signed. So if an employee at Starbucks wanted to, let's say someone in their finance department wanted to be like, hey, give me a list of all the contracts over the past year and the ones that we specifically signed in Canada, ChatGPT wouldn't be able to answer that. That's where additional technologies like RAG, retrieval augmented generation, integrating with private data is important. That's the difference between consumer ChatGPT versus enterprise LLMs that need to be integrated with the private data layer to be more useful.
No, that's really, that clarifies a lot of things. One more question, may or may not be relevant to this podcast. It took almost 7-8 years for OpenAI to launch ChatGPT for the very first time, and it blew up, right? But as soon as ChatGPT got launched, now we see a lot of companies coming up with their large language models. How difficult is to make a large language model?
Extremely difficult. Right? As of right now, the companies with the means to do so, and by means I mean both the financial capital as well as the technical expertise to do so, limited, right? Less than 100 companies in the world can pre-train a foundation model. It's getting easier and easier. For example, when DeepSeek came out and made the news, it was because they borrowed from Llama's architecture. But they also built a lot of their own optimizations and techniques that allowed them to copy and improve upon this architecture, right? So what's interesting is now that LLMs have taken fire and the whole world is paying attention, I don't think it's an exaggeration to say trillions of dollars are being thrown at this problem. And that's why research is developing so quickly at this point. But to be clear, Datasaur, for example, wouldn't have the means to train a foundation model. But what we can do is take any of these open foundation models and fine-tune them to get to the point where it's going to actually outperform ChatGPT at specific use cases.
When you say fine-tune an open source model, what do you exactly do when you fine-tune a model?
Yeah, good question. Fine-tune, there's that kind of like the casual way of saying it, which means just customize a model. But then there's also the scientific definition of actually fine-tuning. You know, the scientific method of fine-tuning is giving a model a bunch of examples and saying, here's how I would respond to these questions. Learn from this, identify the patterns from the examples I gave you, and answer future questions in this way. So as an example, right, there's general customer support, and then there's customer support you would expect from the Four Seasons Hotel. You can imagine much more professional, much more refined. So you could, if you were Four Seasons customer support, you can say, hey, here's 10,000 examples of how we responded to customer queries in the last 2 years. You can feed that into the model, fine-tune it, and now you have a model that's going to answer much more like Four Seasons rather than your standard customer support.
And you do that using vector databases?
No, so fine-tuning is a specific technique. You use GPUs to kind of like, LLMs have all these neural layers to them. What fine-tuning does is it retunes the parameters. So this is obviously an oversimplification, but maybe the like professional and elegant layers of that get jacked way up for Four Seasons. And then the casual slang using versions of ChatGPT get toned way down. So now you have a new model that's been rewired literally from the ground up to learn more of how Four Seasons would answer.
Wow, I wish you could actually teach me that.
I can.
I would love to come to your office, see actually that GPU and everything, but I would leave that to you. But no, that is super helpful, trust me. One more question that always comes up. So when I started my master's degree at Duke, we had this few subjects called data analysis, data mining, super in demand, like very famous among students, and we all learned how to use SQL to extract information from databases, how to tune machine learning models, right, and get some output. Are people still training machine learning models when we have large language models available?
Yeah.
And what use cases are they still relevant?
So I'll give you one of my favorite examples. There's a field of data called PII, personally identifiable information, right? This includes things like your name, your date of birth, your social security number. That kind of information is treated as confidential and according to many laws cannot be disclosed in certain scenarios. Like for example, your bank is very regulated in who they can share that information with for obvious reasons. Now there's a whole industry of companies that want to do PII de-identification so that when you are sending this to someone, it basically censors your name, your social security number, right? Replaces it with asterisks or something like that. Now, before ChatGPT, there were technologies that could do this at 99.9999% accuracy, 4 levels of nines, right? And now, post-ChatGPT, people are using LLMs to do this. The problem is LLMs are only 95% accurate because they hallucinate. And they take 100 times as long because they're much larger models, and they're 100 times more expensive because they're much larger models. So that's an example where it's overkill. You don't want to use an LLM for that. Traditional machine learning was very good at identifying those fields. It had already been trained for a decade to do precisely that at sub-second latency. So it kills me when companies are using LLMs to do the same solution.
So students who are doing, say, bachelor's or master's in data science, they still need to learn how to train machine learning models and get the outcomes rather than thinking, oh, now LLMs are there, we don't need to learn training machine learning models, right?
That's right.
To get into data science career. Okay, that's amazing. That's awesome. I want to learn, before we wrap up this podcast, I want to learn about your entrepreneurship journey. You started low-key, got it acquired. Why don't you tell me about your journey in the early days? How did you start your first company? What are the challenges? How did you overcome that feeling of doubt? Okay, will I be able to do it? Will I be able to survive in this Silicon Valley, where at least every person seems to be like a super intelligent human? So how can anyone start their journey?
I think I've had a lot of people ask me this over the years, and I think it comes down to a lot of people kind of put entrepreneurs on a pedestal unnecessarily, right? I don't think entrepreneurs are necessarily built different. This might be controversial, but I think I know individuals who are individually more intelligent than Mark Zuckerberg,
Okay.
right? Than Steve Jobs, than Bill Gates, than Elon. Pick your favorite entrepreneur, right? I think there are people who are more intelligent. They were not 1 in a billion like prodigies. They're smart, but there's a ton of smart people around here. Being an entrepreneur is more so just finding an idea that you're really passionate about and giving it a shot. You ask about my first journey. It wasn't any particular shot of courage. It wasn't anything that was like, it's more of the naivete coming into it. I didn't know what I was getting myself into. Maybe if I did, I wouldn't have done it. But the way that company unfolded was my friends and I just wanted to build a game over a summer because we were lifelong gamers. It was our dream and passion to build a game. And we had so much fun doing it, we didn't want to go back to school. I dropped out of my master's because I had more fun building the game than going to class. So then we just kept building the game. And at some point, we ran out of, we had very limited savings because we were just college students. So very quickly, we ran out of savings, and being here in Silicon Valley, somebody suggested, why don't you go talk to this investor? And we talked to the investor and they gave us money to keep building the game. So it was just like one foot in front of the other. And we almost stumbled into it by accident, right?
Okay.
Kids in their teens and early 20s who are starting companies are usually not out there to build billion-dollar empires. They're just doing something more often than not. They just found a technology, a project that they were really excited about and wanted to just get out there into the world. Right? There's also a corollary to this, which is the most successful companies are started by people in their 40s, believe it or not.
Okay.
Right? Again, it's what you read in the media versus what is there in the real world. The media loves focusing on 21-year-old prodigy dropouts.
Yep.
But in the real world, people with plenty of real world experience, knowing exactly what problem to solve, managerial experience, all of that, are more successful. So I do think there are 40-year-olds who are out there trying to start $100 million companies. And that's a more realistic scenario. When I was 20, I just didn't know what I was doing.
Okay. What would you advise to your 20 years self if you have to start all over today?
So the key part of that is if I were to start all over today, I think there's one personality trait more important than anything else today, which is curiosity. In my generation, we had Wikipedia to learn from.
Yep.
Now you have something even more powerful. You want to learn anything, you can get to graduate level degree of knowledge from all the resources you have online. Combination of ChatGPT and YouTube.
YouTube, yep.
Right? You have those two things, you can get to a graduate level understanding in anything. That's insane.
Yep.
Right? So really the only thing holding people back is their intellectual curiosity and their interest in getting to that level of knowledge and expertise. That's the only thing differentiating. Yes, the internet has had a lot of problems, and I am not a techno-optimist that says technology fixes everything. But one of the visions of the internet was that it would also be a democratizing technology that levels the playing field. And it has specifically in the domain of knowledge, right? You can be a kid growing up halfway across the world from San Francisco and learn everything that YC teaches to founders here in San Francisco.
Yep, that is so true, so true. My last question to you, what is the best financial advice that you have received in your entrepreneurship journey? Or what is the best financial understanding that you have gained over the years?
I'm not a financial guru, so I'm not well suited to answer that question, but I will posit this. I think that one thing that people think is the more you raise, the better you must be doing. I think that is false.
Okay.
Every seasoned entrepreneur I know knows that the dream is to bootstrap your own company. If you can do that, then you own 100% of your company, you own 100% of your destiny, right?
Yep.
If I could have done that with Datasaur, I absolutely would have. So again, people get fixated on headlines, on TechCrunch headlines saying, so-and-so raised $100 million, so-and-so reached a unicorn valuation, right?
Yep.
Give me a company that makes $10 million in revenue a year and I own 100% of it, give me that anytime over a unicorn valued startup.
Absolutely.
Right?
Love that.
So maybe that's a bit of a hot take, but yeah, raising money is never the end point. It is only a tool that you have in your toolkit to get to the goals you want to reach.
I totally agree with you. This is so amazing. Thank you so much, Ivan, for sharing all your knowledge related to LLM, privately built LLMs, and your entrepreneurship journey. I absolutely loved it, learned a lot from you, and I would really, really appreciate if you can show me one example on how you fine-tune a large language model for one particular problem.
Sure, happy to.
Thank you so much.
Thank you. There's no more interesting time in the past century to be working in the technology space.
What is the risk of using ChatGPT for your business needs?
Here's the nightmare story I heard from another founder.
Okay.
They were using ChatGPT. A competitor had just signed a contract with Subway, and they said, tell me what that contract would look like in Subway. What they got in response was the exact contract that their competitor had signed with Subway. They were able to verify it's the right people signing the document, right pricing, everything.
Really? What is the risk that people don't understand?
That is the kind of nightmare story we want to help people avoid. There was a court order that said anybody below 0 data retention, you have to retain all temporary chats.
I want to have my private LLM. How much does it cost?
Here's the open secret. I'll say this on camera. If you're a startup, you can apply for credits. They're very generous with their credits, and you can basically get started for free. That's a pre-seed round of funding. It's insane.
How difficult is to make a large language model?
Extremely difficult.
What would you advise to your 20 years self if you have to start all over today?
So the key part of that, I think there's one personality trait more important than anything else today, which is curiosity. The more you raise, the better you must be doing.